Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. We have reached Passover, Wednesday evening. We sit down for Seder and we begin the week-long holiday of Pesach, or Passover. Pesach is one of three pilgrimage festivals, one of three major festivals mentioned in the Torah. We've got Pesach right now, and then in a little more than a month, we've got Shavuot, and then in the fall, we've got Sukkot. Now, Rabbi Lisa Goldstein, a teacher of mine, passed on an interesting observation about a difference between Pesach and the other two. With Shavuot and Sukkot, the Torah commands us to be joyous. We are required to be joyful in the holiday. But there isn't any commandment about joy for Pesach. And she speculates, Rabbi Goldstein does, that is at least in part because of the agricultural roots of these holidays. All three of these festivals were originally, at least in part, agricultural holidays. So Shavuot marks the bringing of the first fruits, the first produce of the trees and such. And Sukkot marks the harvest, the bringing in of the fruits of our own labors from the field. Whereas Pesach marks the beginning of the growing season. It comes after a winter when we would have been living on what we had stored away, and probably by the time we get here, we're pretty low on food supplies. So those other two holidays mark the time when we are getting food to eat. This marks the time when we're getting close to getting food, but there is so much uncertainty. In the ancient world, when you got to spring, you hoped for a lot of bounty and a good harvest, but you couldn't be sure about it. This might be the beginning of an amazingly abundant time, or this might be the beginning of a famine, and there was really no way to know at this moment. So Pesach was a time of hope, for sure, but it was also a time of great anxiety and uncertainty and fear. And it's impossible, Rabbi Goldstein passes on, it's impossible to tell someone they have to be joyous when they're feeling anxious and afraid. And that's a lesson which resonates with me and probably with all of us right now. We are entering Passover with more uncertainty and anxiety and fear than probably any Passover in most of our lives. We just don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't know if this quarantine is going to last a couple more weeks or a couple more months or, God forbid, even longer than that. We don't know individually if we're going to be healthy or if we're going to get sick, how our loved ones are going to do. If we get sick, how bad it's going to be. On and on. There is just so much that we just don't know about. And that's leaving all of us, to one degree or another, anxious and fearful and unsettled, which might mean that it's impossible to be fully joyous during this holiday. And the message which we get from Pesach is that's okay. We are allowed to not be joyous if we can't be. If we can be, that's fantastic. There's no prohibition against joy during Pesach. And if we're lucky enough to be able to find some joy during a hard time, then we should embrace it and we should live it fully. But if we can't, if that uncertain future, if those dark clouds just make it impossible to get to that place of joy, then that's okay. We're allowed to live with that too. But we don't just live with that. That's the other half of the message of Passover. Because when the rabbis of old describe how to observe Passover, their primary mitzvah was to tell a story. And they said we have to tell a story which begins with ganut and ends with shevach, which begins with degradation and ends with glory. That's what Passover is really about. It's about telling stories that begin in dark, low places, but end in exalted places. And that we can do, even if we're afraid, even if we're anxious, even if we're miserable. We can tell stories about journeys that we've taken, or journeys that we've heard about, or journeys that we've imagined that take us from that terrible place into a much better place. We can remember a time in our life when we were somewhere physically, emotionally, spiritually where we didn't want to be, but somehow through luck or effort or grace of God or someone else got somewhere better. And if we can't remember a place like that or a time like that, we can certainly imagine one. We can imagine how this story might end with happiness. One way or another, we've got stories inside of us which take us from those low, dark places into those better, sacred places. And that's the work of this holiday. It's reminding ourselves that individually, as a community, as a world, we have the potential for this to get better. We have the potential to find ourselves in brightly lit holy places once again. So if you sit down for Seder and you're surrounded by family or friends and a couple of Zoom screens, and that lifts your heart and makes you want to sing with joy, then absolutely do so. But if you find yourself just not able to feel that kind of happiness right now, give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling and not pretend otherwise. But then take a moment and tell one of those stories. And I mean really tell it. Find someone who will listen, a member of your family, a friend, a loved one, anyone, and tell them of a time when things have gotten better for you. Or tell them of a dream you have of when things can get better. Passover is the holiday which commemorates our escape from Egypt into freedom. We are all right now in some kind of an Egypt, some kind of a place which is holding us in and constricting us. But those times end. So I look forward to hearing your stories, and I look forward to a time when this darkness has ended and we are finally into our promised land. Chag Sameach, everyone. Have a lovely Passover.